The desert holds memories better than people ever could. It keeps the whispers of hooves pressed into the earth, the faint cries of wagons long gone, the laughter that once rang against canyon walls and then slipped away into silence. Out here, time moves like a weary horse, steady, slow, and never turning back. The town of Dry Creek lies at the edge of that silence, a collection of wooden bones half buried in dust. At sundown, the streets glow amber, each plank of the boardwalk painted in the fading fire of the day. Horses shift and stamp, their tails swatting at flies, while men lean in shadows outside the saloon, pipes glowing like fallen stars. You could almost believe the world holds its breath at such an hour, waiting for the darkness to draw its long curtain across the stage. It is here our story begins, not with gunfire, not with gold, but with a woman walking alone down the street, her skirts gathering dust as if the land itself meant to claim her. Her name was Eliza Carter. She was not a woman anyone would call fragile, though many mistook her stillness for weakness. She carried herself with the quiet of someone who had lived through storms and learned that lightning does not need to be chased. Her hair, once dark as raven's wing, carried the faint silver threads of grief, though she was not yet 35. Her hands bore the calluses of work, mending clothes, scrubbing boards, pulling water from the well, but her eyes carried something softer, something you might notice if you dared to look long enough. Eliza ran a boarding house on the corner where the dusty street bent toward the church. The place smelled faintly of cedar and soap, a little sanctuary where tired travelers found beds and warm bread. She was mother and healer to men she never married, nurse to cowhands whose wounds were more of the heart than of the body. Yet the townsfolk, with their endless talk, still called her unlucky. They whispered of her husband who had once ridden tall and proud, only to fall in a shootout when the whiskey turned bitter and words turned to bullets. That was years ago, but in a town where time barely moves, memory never loosens its grip. Some nights, when the lanterns burned low and the desert cooled, she would sit by the window and stitch shirts by hand. Her needle dipped and rose like a small silver fish, catching the lamplight, as though weaving her sorrow into something useful. In those hours she seemed almost outside of time, a figure framed in amber, a ghost of the woman she might have been. But life, even when quiet, does not leave a soul untouched. It was one evening, just as the sky bruised purple over the horizon, that Jack Rollins came calling. Jack was a cattleman of some reputation, broad-shouldered, sunburned, with a voice that carried too loudly and a laugh that seemed to reach for attention like a hand always hungry. He was admired by many in Dry Creek, men for his swagger, women for his looks. His boots always seemed polished, his hat tilted just enough to suggest charm. But beneath the shine was something hollow, though not everyone could see it. Jack courted Eliza in his fashion. He brought her wildflowers once, plucked from some field beyond town, already half-wilted in the heat. He spoke of how a woman like her deserved better than to mend sheets for strangers. He hinted at land he might own someday, cattle he might drive, a house built larger than her small boarding place. For a time, Eliza allowed his company, not because she was swept away by him. Her heart was too wise for that, but because it had been so long since a man had looked at her without pity. He carried the lightness of laughter, and for a moment she remembered what it felt like not to be alone. But Jack was not made for depth. His eyes glanced over her as if searching for something younger, lighter, less marked by sorrow. One night, with whiskey on his breath, he said too plainly what others only whispered, that she was strong, yes, but worn, that her past was too heavy, her sorrow too deep. He said it with a smile, thinking himself honest, not cruel. Yet his words cut sharper than any blade. Eliza did not cry. She only stood from her chair, smoothed her skirts, and told him the door was just as easy to open as it was to close. And so he left, boots striking the wooden steps as though stamping his presence into the earth, eager to seek company more flattering. The town whispered again, louder this time. Poor Eliza, left once more. Some women are simply meant for sorrow, they said. But Eliza, though her heart ached, did not break. She returned to her sewing, to her work, to the steady rhythm of survival. She knew by then that grief, like dust, never leaves. It simply settles into the seams of your clothing, into the cracks of your home, into the lungs of your soul. And still you breathe. What no one noticed, or perhaps chose not to see, was the man who watched her quietly from the forge at the edge of town. His name, not yet spoken in her story, was Thomas Avery. He was the blacksmith, tall, quiet, his arms strong with the shaping of iron. He did not laugh loudly like Jack, nor speak often, but his eyes lingered with a gentleness most men had long forgotten how to carry. One night, when Eliza sat by the window, stitching in the lamplight, Thomas passed by on his way home. He paused a moment, the glow of her window spilling across the street like a beacon. She did not see him there, or perhaps she did and pretended not to. But in that moment, the first seed of something unspoken was planted deep in the soil of silence. The desert holds memories, yes, but sometimes it also holds beginnings. And so the first chapter of our tale rests here, between the dust and the silence, between rejection and endurance, between the shadows of the past and the faint glimmer of what is yet to come. Sparkles, end of section 1, 1,400 words target draft, but here I gave you the full flowing first act, can be expanded with more cinematic detail if needed. Would you like me to expand section 1 further toward the full 1,400 words with more slow, cinematic detail, adding daily life of Eliza, more town atmosphere, and whispers of Jack's rejection? Or move ahead to drafting section 2 so the rhythm of the story keeps flowing? Morning comes gentle in Dry Creek, though the desert never softens for long. The first light spills across the rooftops in pale pink, turning every weathered plank of wood into something tender, almost holy. The bell in the little white church stirs the air, its sound drifting through open windows and settling like dust upon the town. Eliza rises before the town fully wakes. Her mornings are stitched with ritual, water drawn from the well, bread kneaded and set to bake, sheets hung out in the sun to dry. She works without complaint, though every motion carries weight. Some days she hums under her breath, an old hymn her mother once sang. Most days she moves in silence, letting the world's small sounds keep her company. The creak of the well rope, the rustle of chickens, the soft thud of her broom on wooden boards. On such a morning, Thomas Avery came to her doorstep. He stood there quietly, a tall figure in a faded shirt, his hands rough with the soot of iron. He held in one arm a chair from her boarding house, the one that had broken beneath the weight of a passing ranch hand. He had taken it the day before, saying little, only nodding when she asked if he might mend it. Now he set it gently upon her porch, good as new, the wood smoothed and strengthened. She stepped out, brushing flour from her apron. For a moment their eyes met. His gaze was not quick, not searching. It lingered, steady, as though he were not looking at her sorrow, but through it, to something more enduring. She offered payment. He shook his head. She tried again, insisting. His answer was only a quiet smile, softer than any words. That was the first act of kindness, small enough to pass unnoticed. Yet to Eliza it felt like the first drop of rain on parched soil. Thomas returned often after that, though never with fanfare. Sometimes he brought iron hinges for doors that groaned too loud. Sometimes he carried firewood when the winds threatened to turn the nights colder. He never asked for thanks. He never lingered longer than respect allowed. Yet each time, Eliza felt a quiet warmth bloom where grief had long held root. One afternoon, when the sun bent low and painted the town in gold, she carried a plate of biscuits wrapped in a cloth to his forge. The air smelled of smoke and hot metal, the ringing of his hammer echoing like a heartbeat. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering in his eyes. She set the plate on his workbench without words. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them filled instead with the sound of horses outside, the cicadas singing their endless summer hymn. When he finally reached for the biscuits, his rough hands held them gently, as though even bread deserved reverence. He nodded once, the gesture heavy with meaning. She felt a strange peace settle over her, as if she had given him more than food. It was in these small offerings, a chair mended, a plate shared, a walk down a dim street, that their bond began to take shape. The townsfolk, ever eager for talk, noticed. Whispers curled through the saloon and church pews alike. Eliza and the blacksmith. The widow and the quiet man. Some said it was fitting, two lonely souls clinging to each other. Others muttered that a woman like her deserved more than a man who rarely spoke, who lived with soot on his skin and silence on his lips. But Eliza paid no mind to such words. She had lived long enough to know that love, if it was ever to come again, would not be found in laughter that rang too loud or promises spun like gold dust. It would be found in the steady presence of someone who asked nothing and gave quietly, without demand. Still, Jack Rawlins was not blind. He returned to her boarding house one evening, his boots muddy, his smile sharp as a knife. He leaned against her doorway with the arrogance of a man too certain of himself. His words came honeyed, yet bitter beneath. He spoke of how the town laughed at her for keeping company with a man like Thomas. How she could do better, how she once nearly had better, if only she had accepted his hand. Eliza's eyes did not waver. She told him softly that kindness was worth more than charm, that she would rather share silence with a man of truth than laughter with one who loved only himself. Jack's smile faltered. His pride stung. He muttered something about fools and wasted women before stomping off into the night. His shadow stretched long across the dirt street, yet it carried no weight. And so Eliza's heart, once heavy as stone, began to lighten. She did not fall quickly, nor foolishly, but she began to see Thomas not as the quiet blacksmith at the edge of town, but as the steady rhythm against which her own weary heart might rest. They walked together sometimes, when the air cooled and lanterns flickered to life. Words were scarce, yet the silence between them was never empty. It was a silence that held safety, the kind that tells you no mask is needed, no performance required. She felt seen, not for her sorrow, not for her scars, but for the strength that had carried her through them. One night, as the cicadas quieted and the stars laid themselves thick across the sky, Thomas walked her home from the church social. At her gate, he paused, his hand resting briefly on the wormwood. He did not speak. He only looked at her, his eyes steady, holding something she had almost forgotten existed, respect without expectation. Eliza turned then, her heart trembling with something she had long thought buried. And in the stillness, she realized that perhaps love, when it comes a second time, does not roar like fire. It blooms like dawn, slow and certain, until suddenly the whole sky is filled with light. The desert knows how to hold its breath before a storm. Days grow heavy with heat, the air dense and still, as though the earth itself waits for some breaking. That was how Dry Creek felt in those weeks, quiet on the surface, yet humming with a tension that pressed into every soul. Above the plains, the sky gathered bruises, clouds swelling thick and dark until they hung low like a lid upon the land. Men spat into the dirt, muttering of bad weather, while women hurried laundry from lines, glancing at the horizon as though it carried more than just rain. It was in this uneasy stillness that Jack Rawlins grew restless. His pride, wounded by Eliza's rejection, burned hotter than the sun itself. Wherever he went, saloon, stable, street corner, his voice carried sharp with bitterness. He spoke of Thomas Avery as if he were a shadow unworthy of notice. Called him mute, soft, a man better suited to bending iron than standing beside a woman of strength. But pride has a way of turning even whispers into sparks. Soon the town was divided in its talk. Some smirked behind Eliza's back, wondering if she had truly chosen the blacksmith silence over the cattleman's swagger. Others said little, but in their silence there was a respect that even Jack could not stamp out. One evening, when the storm was building and thunder murmured far off, Jack strode into the blacksmith's forge. He carried with him the swagger of a man used to being heard, and the sourness of whiskey clung to his breath. Thomas was at his anvil, the ring of his hammer echoing like a slow drumbeat. He did not look up when Jack entered, but the heat of the forge lit the sweat on his brow, painting him in firelight. Jack leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, voice dripping with mockery. So this is the man she prefers. A blacksmith who hides behind his silence. Tell me, Avery, do you even know how to keep a woman's heart? Or do you only know how to hammer steel? The hammer rose, fell, sparks leaping into the air. Thomas said nothing. Jack sneered. Silence again. You think that makes you stronger? Makes you better than me? Still Thomas worked, shaping the glowing iron, as though Jack's word were nothing more than wind against the door. But Eliza heard of it. She heard how Jack had tried to provoke him, how Thomas never raised his voice nor his fist, only stood steady until Jack grew tired of his own noise and stormed off into the dusk. That night, while rain rattled against the roof of her boarding house, Eliza sat with her sewing left unfinished in her lap. The thunder outside echoed the storm within her, a storm of memory, fear, and awakening. She thought of Jack's laughter, bright yet hollow, how easily it turned cruel. And then she thought of Thomas, his silence carrying more truth than Jack's loudest boasts. And slowly she understood. Love was not the flame that consumes you. It was the hearth fire that warms you. Not the storm that tears the roof away, but the steady shelter that holds firm through the rain. Her heart, long guarded, softened. Days later, when the storm had broken and the land steamed beneath a washed sky, Thomas came to her porch again. He held something small in his hand, her late husband's pocket watch, long broken, forgotten in a drawer. He had taken it quietly, asking once if he might try to mend it. Now, he placed it in her palm. The glass was polished, the gears moving with a soft tick once more, steady as breath. Time moves forward, he said simply, his voice low, rough with the weight of words seldom spoken. But memory stays. Eliza looked at him then, really looked, and in his face she saw not pity, not desire, but a kind of reverence. As though she were not a broken woman to be pitied, nor a prize to be claimed, but a soul to be honored. Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. Instead she laid her hand upon his, just a touch, light as wind across grass. And for the first time in years, she let herself lean, not against duty, not against grief, but against another heart. The town still whispered. Jack still muttered, his pride now sharp as barbed wire. But Eliza no longer listened, for she had found something deeper than their gossip, something quieter and truer. Yet storms never pass without leaving marks, and some men cannot let go of pride without drawing blood. In the distance, beyond the settled calm, Jack's anger was sharpening into something more dangerous. A reckoning was stirring on the horizon, and soon the town would learn that silence can be stronger than gunfire, and kindness fiercer than rage. The night of the dance arrived beneath a sky thick with stars. Lanterns swung from ropes strung between buildings, their glow spilling golden circles onto the dust. The fiddler bow scraped across strings, and laughter rose like smoke, twining upward into the cool air. For one evening, Dry Creek forgot its weariness. Boots stamped in rhythm, skirts spun like prairie grass caught in the wind, and children darted between legs, their joy ringing like small bells. Eliza stood near the edge of it all, her dress plain, yet touched with a ribbon of deep blue she had saved for special nights. Her hair was drawn back, a few strands escaping to catch the lamplight. She had not meant to glow, yet in the warmth of the lanterns and the hum of the music, she did. Thomas was there, too, though he kept to the edges as he always did. The forge had left his hands darkened with soot that even the strongest soap could not scrub away. He wore his Sunday shirt, though it bore the marks of mending. He leaned against a post, quiet, his eyes steady on the gathering, not seeking attention, but watching with a kind of patient reverence. For a time, it felt almost safe, almost like peace had chosen to linger. But peace is fragile in towns where pride burns hotter than reason. Jack Rollins arrived with whiskey sharp in his breath and envy sharp in his eyes. He strode into the lantern glow with the swagger of a man unwilling to be forgotten. The crowd parted for him, some in respect, summoned caution. His gaze found Eliza first, then slid toward Thomas, and the storm that had been brewing for weeks at last found its sky. He called Thomas out before them all. His voice rose above the fiddle, rough and bitter. There he is, the silent smith who thinks silence makes him strong. Tell me, Eliza, is this the man you've chosen? This shadow, this mute fool who lets others speak for him? The music faltered. Feet stilled on the dust. The town watched, the air strung tight as a wire. Thomas did not answer at once. He only looked at Jack, his face calm, his eyes steady as the iron he worked each day. The silence stretched, not weak, but heavy, a silence that spoke louder than Jack's mocking words. Jack grew restless in that stillness. His pride demanded noise. He stepped closer, voice sharp. Speak, damn you. Prove yourself. Or are you too much a coward to even raise your tongue? Thomas's voice came then, low, even like thunder far away. A man does not need to raise his voice to be heard. A murmur stirred through the crowd. Jack's face flushed red. His hand twitched toward the pistol at his hip. Pride and whiskey and wounded vanity are dangerous things in the West. Eliza felt her heart pound against her ribs, but she did not step back. Instead, she stepped forward between them. Her voice, though softer, cut through the night like a blade of light. Enough, she said, her eyes on Jack, unflinching. I will not be measured by your words, nor by his silence. I'm not a prize to be won or a burden to be thrown aside. I choose where I stand. And I stand here. Her hand found Thomas's, not with desperation, but with certainty. The sight of it silenced the murmurs. Jack's hand curled tighter around his pistol. But in that moment, Thomas moved, not fast, not with violence. He simply stepped forward, his body a shield before Eliza, his voice calm as a river stone. You carry a gun to prove your strength. But strength is not in bullets. It is in restraint. It is in choosing to build, not destroy. His words, steady and low, carried more weight than Jack's shouting ever could. For a breathless moment, no one moved. The lanterns swayed in the night wind, casting shadows that trembled across the dirt. Then Jack's hand fell away from his pistol. His shoulders slumped, his pride crumbling under the weight of his own emptiness. He muttered something bitter, turned, and stalked into the darkness. The crowd watched him go, his shadow swallowed by the night. And with his leaving, the air seemed to soften. The fiddler touched strings once more. Slowly, as if waking from a hell breath, the dance resumed. Laughter returned, though quieter, tinged with the memory of what had almost been. Eliza and Thomas remained where they stood, lantern light pooling around them. She looked at him, her eyes shining not with fear, but with something gentler. He met her gaze, steady as always, and for the first time, a small smile curved his lips. He did not ask her to dance. He only offered his hand. She placed hers in it, and together they stepped into the circle of lanterns, moving not with show, not with haste, but with the quiet rhythm of two hearts learning to beat in time. The town saw them, and in their seeing, something shifted. No longer was Eliza the unlucky widow. No longer was Thomas only the silent smith. Together, they became something different, something stronger. And so the night carried on, lanterns flickering like stars brought down to earth, the music weaving through the dust, the desert sky. The old stories of the West often tell of gunfire and gold, of men who carved their names with bullets and wood. But not all tales are written in noise. Some are written in silence, in kindness, in the gentle courage of choosing to see another soul for what it truly is. Eliza and Thomas's story was not about victory or conquest. It was about finding shelter in another's heart, about learning that love does not roar, but hums softly, steady as the ticking of a mended watch. And maybe that is the truest kind of Wild West tale. Not of battles won, but of loneliness healed. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to linger a while. Share your thoughts. Let your voice join ours around this old fire. Like, comment, and subscribe, so these Wild West tales may keep riding into the night. And tell me, friend, from where in this wide, wandering world are you listening tonight? holding it all in its vast embrace.